August 12, 1985, a packed Boeing 747 departs Tokyo, Japan, on what should have been a routine one-hour flight. But just 12 minutes after takeoff, passengers hear a massive explosion. The aircraft violently shakes. Oxygen masks drop from the ceiling, and inside the cockpit, the pilots realize something terrifying. The plane can no longer be controlled normally. What followed became one of the deadliest aviation disasters in history. A crippled jumbo jet fighting to stay in the air for over 30 terrifying minutes, passengers writing goodbye messages to their families, and a desperate crew battling against impossible odds. This is the story of Japan Airlines Flight 123, the plane that refused to fall. On the evening of August 12, 1985, Japan Airlines Flight 123 prepared for departure from Tokyo's Haneda Airport. Its destination was Osaka, Japan. The aircraft was a Boeing 747SR, a specially modified version of the famous jumbo jet designed for short domestic flights with large passenger capacity. On board were 524 people, 509 passengers, 15 crew members. It would become one of the deadliest single aircraft disasters in aviation history. At the controls sat Captain Masami Takahama, an experienced pilot with over 12,000 flight hours. The weather was clear. Nothing appeared unusual. At 6:12 p.m., Flight 123 lifted off from Tokyo. For the first several minutes, everything felt completely normal. Passengers relaxed into their seats. Flight attendants began cabin service. Nobody on board knew disaster was already approaching. Just 12 minutes after takeoff, while climbing near Mount Fuji, a massive explosion suddenly ripped through the rear section of the aircraft. Passengers described hearing a loud boom like a bomb exploding. The aircraft violently jerked upward. Inside the cockpit, warning alarms activated immediately. But this wasn't an engine failure. It was something much worse. The aircraft's rear pressure bulkhead had catastrophically failed. The pressure bulkhead is a critical structural wall located in the rear of the aircraft. When it failed, explosive decompression tore through the tail section. And in seconds, Flight 123 lost almost all hydraulic control systems. Hydraulics are what allow pilots to control the aircraft's movement. Without them, controlling a jumbo jet becomes nearly impossible. The explosion also destroyed the vertical stabilizer, the large tail fin that keeps the aircraft stable. Parts of the tail ripped away and fell into the mountains below. The Boeing 747 was now critically damaged and barely controllable. Inside the cockpit, chaos erupted. The pilots struggled desperately to stabilize the aircraft, but every normal control input barely worked. The plane entered violent oscillations. It climbed, then dropped, then rolled side to side unpredictably. Passengers screamed in terror as the aircraft shook violently through the sky. Flight attendants struggled to remain standing. Oxygen masks deployed. Loose objects flew across the cabin, and yet somehow, the pilots kept the aircraft airborne. Using engine thrust alone, they attempted to steer the crippled jumbo jet. By adjusting power between the engines, they could create limited directional control, but the aircraft constantly fought against them. Investigators later described the situation as nearly impossible to survive. Still, the crew refused to give up. As the plane continued flying uncontrollably over Japan, passengers realized they might not survive. Some began praying. Others cried quietly. Several passengers wrote goodbye notes to loved ones. One passenger wrote, "Please take care of my children." Another simply wrote, "I am grateful for the truly happy life I have had." Those heartbreaking messages would later become some of the most emotional artifacts in aviation history. Meanwhile, inside the cockpit, the pilots continued fighting for control minute after minute. The aircraft remained in the air far longer than anyone expected, but every second increased the danger. The damaged aircraft was slowly becoming uncontrollable. For 32 terrifying minutes, Flight 123 continued flying through the mountains of Japan. Air traffic controllers desperately attempted to guide the aircraft toward emergency landing options, but the pilots struggled just to keep the nose level. Then the situation worsened. The aircraft entered a final uncontrollable descent. The Boeing rolled violently. Altitude dropped rapidly. Passengers experienced intense G-forces. And at 6:56 p.m., Japan Airlines Flight 123 slammed into Mount Takamagahara. The impact was catastrophic. The aircraft exploded across the mountainside. Out of 524 people on board, only 4 survived. 520 lives were lost. It remains the deadliest single aircraft accident in aviation history. In the aftermath, investigators worked to determine exactly what caused the disaster. What they discovered shocked the aviation world. 7 years before the crash, the aircraft had suffered a tail strike during landing. A tail strike occurs when the rear section of an aircraft hits the runway. The damage required major repairs to the rear pressure bulkhead, but investigators discovered the repair had been done incorrectly. A critical metal splice plate had not been installed according to Boeing specifications. Over thousands of pressurization cycles, cracks slowly developed. Then on August 12, 1985, the bulkhead finally failed completely. That single structural failure triggered the chain of events that destroyed Flight 123. The crash permanently changed aircraft maintenance procedures worldwide. Even today, aviation experts continue praising the crew of Flight 123. Many believe the aircraft should have crashed almost immediately after the bulkhead failure, yet the pilots kept the crippled aircraft flying for over half an hour. Their actions likely saved additional lives by delaying the inevitable impact. The crew continued fighting until the very end, and their determination remains one of the most respected examples of professionalism in aviation history. Japan Airlines Flight 123 became more than just an aviation disaster. It became a story of courage under impossible circumstances, a story of passengers facing their final moments with heartbreaking humanity, and a story of pilots refusing to surrender even after losing almost all control of their aircraft. Nearly 4 decades later, the tragedy of Flight 123 is still remembered around the world, not only because of the scale of the disaster, but because of the extraordinary fight that happened in the skies above Japan that night. If you enjoyed this aviation documentary, subscribe to Sky Aviation Files for more real aviation stories every week. And let me know in the comments, what aviation story should we cover next?